Something just shifted quietly, but dangerously. Iran's top diplomat has just landed in Pakistan, and it's not just another meeting. Behind closed doors, talks are restarting talks that could pause a war or reshape it entirely. But here's the real question. Why now? Why Islamabad? And why under this level of urgency? Because this isn't just diplomacy, it's positioning. Every move, every word, is part of a larger strategic game playing out across the region. A ceasefire might be on the table, but so is something far more calculated. And if this deal goes through, the balance of power in the Middle East may not just stabilize, it could shift. Now, please continue watching the news broadcast for the most detailed perspective. In modern warfare, the most decisive weapon isn't missiles or fighter jets, it's narrative. Victory begins by shaping perception, controlling what others see, believe, and ultimately fear. Welcome to the invisible front lines of the Middle East. This isn't about explosions or troop movements, but a calculated act of psychological warfare. When Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Islamabad, smiling and relaxed amid rising tensions, it looked like routine diplomacy. Standing beside Ishaq Dar and Asim Munir, the message seemed simple until the words "reviving ceasefire negotiations" hit the global media. That phrase was the real operation. In a region already engulfed in conflict, the idea of negotiating peace in Pakistan is strategically illogical. Islamabad has little influence over Israel or the active fronts, but that's the point. This wasn't diplomacy, it was narrative warfare. Iran wasn't seeking peace, it was reshaping perception, breaking the image of isolation, and forcing the world to react to a new storyline they had just created. Enter the flight to Islamabad. By initiating a highly visible, incredibly formal diplomatic visit to a neighboring nuclear-armed power, Iran instantly projects an image of profound normalcy. The visual language deployed here is deeply important and heavily weaponized. The tailored suit, the red carpet, the calm demeanor, the diplomatic protocol. These are not the visual cues of a desperate, apocalyptic regime, hiding deep in subterranean bunkers, waiting for the bombs to fall. These are the visual cues of a rational, calculating, confident state actor conducting the routine, civilized business of international relations. The medium is the message, and the message is that Iran is stable, secure, and very much open for dialogue. But the visual trickery is only the first layer of the operation. The true masterstroke, the genius of this psychological gambit, is the deliberate weaponization of the word ceasefire. In the English language, and particularly within the corridors of Western diplomacy, few words trigger such a powerful, Pavlovian response as the word ceasefire. It is the ultimate algorithm hack for the modern media cycle. When a major wire service, like Reuters, the Associated Press, or Agence France Presse, sees the word ceasefire attached to a high-level diplomatic meeting involving a major belligerent in a global crisis, they are structurally compelled to report it. Their editorial guidelines demand it. It immediately becomes the headline. Within minutes of the press release dropping in Islamabad, newsrooms across London, Washington, Berlin, and Paris began churning out breaking news alerts. Iran seeks ceasefire talks. Iranian foreign minister discusses regional peace in Pakistan. Diplomatic breakthrough possible as Tehran signals de-escalation. Just like that, with one press release and a staged, highly photographed handshake, Tehran successfully hijacked the global news cycle. They reached their invisible hands across the globe and took the microphone right out of the hands of their enemies. This is where we must understand the tactical brilliance of the claim versus the truth. A narrative claim in wartime does not have to be true to be effective. It only has to be believable enough to cause a moment of hesitation. By loudly, publicly claiming to be pursuing peace, Iran places a psychological straitjacket on Israel and the United States. They have successfully, almost overnight, framed themselves as the reasonable party in the room. They are telling the world, look at us, look at our actions. We are traveling across the region, meeting with foreign leaders, desperately trying to find a diplomatic off-ramp to save the entire Middle East from the abyss of a catastrophic war. And once that narrative seed is planted in the minds of the global public, the trap is officially set. Think deeply about the immense psychological pressure this deliberately engineered narrative puts on the political and military decision makers in Tel Aviv and Washington. If Iran has successfully convinced even a fraction of the international community, or even just a fraction of the voting public in the West, that they are genuinely seeking a ceasefire, what happens if Israel launches a massive, preemptive, or retaliatory military strike the very next day? The narrative architecture completely flips. Israel is instantly framed not as a nation defending itself, but as the aggressor. Israel becomes the villain who brutally bombed the peacemaker. The headline on the front page of the New York Times will not be "Israel strikes Iranian military targets to neutralize a threat." The headline will be "Israel shatters ceasefire hopes with unprovoked attack on Iran, ignoring diplomatic overtures." This is the very essence of narrative dominance. Iran is using the moral sensibilities, the diplomatic bureaucracy, and the media structures of the Western world against the Western world. They understand, with cold, calculating precision, that democratic nations, unlike authoritarian regimes, are highly sensitive to public opinion. The political leadership in Washington, facing intense domestic pressure, electoral calculations, and a war-weary public, cannot afford to look like they are underwriting a massive regional war when a peaceful, diplomatic alternative is supposedly sitting right there on the table. European allies, always eager for de-escalation at almost any cost, will immediately begin pressuring Washington to hold Israel back, pointing to the supposedly promising developments coming out of Islamabad. Iran knows this dynamic perfectly. They are counting on it. They have mapped the psychological vulnerabilities of their enemies. They are aggressively exploiting the diplomatic bureaucracy of the West to create an invisible, yet incredibly resilient, protective shield over their own physical military infrastructure. Because we must ask the most critical question. While Foreign Minister Araghchi is smiling for the cameras in Pakistan, shaking hands and talking about peace, what is actually happening back home? What is the raw, kinetic reality on the ground inside the borders of the Islamic Republic? While the world is distracted by the shiny, irresistible object of fake peace talks, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not standing still. The strategic missile forces are not taking the weekend off to watch the news. This is where the cognitive battlefield bleeds directly into the physical battlefield, with deadly consequences. In war, time is the most precious commodity imaginable. Time is the difference between a successful strike and a devastating failure. By throwing the word ceasefire into the global ether, Iran has bought themselves time. They have bought themselves perhaps 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, or perhaps even a full week of diplomatic noise, hesitation, and bureaucratic paralysis in Western capitals. In that narrow window of time, massive, lethal military assets are being repositioned. Mobile ballistic missile launchers, the massive transporter Erector launchers are being moved out of their known, easily targetable garrisons and dispersed into the vast, unforgiving, mountainous terrain of the Iranian interior. Underground bunker complexes are being hardened and restocked. Command and control nodes are being decentralized to ensure continuity of government and military operations if a strike does occur. Proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, and Yemen are receiving new, encrypted orders, adjusting their targeting coordinates and preparing for coordinated swarm attacks. The air defense networks, the early warning radars, the surface-to-air missile batteries are all being recalibrated, repositioned, and locked in. They are using the brilliant, blinding illusion of peace to prepare for total, unrestrained war. It is a classic misdirection play, deeply rooted in the Soviet military concept of maskirovka, which translates to military deception on a grand, strategic scale. You convince the enemy to look to the left, to focus all their analytical resources on a diplomatic mirage, while you prepare a devastating, kinetic blow from the right. But in this case, Iran has updated the old Cold War playbook for the hyper-connected digital age. They are not using inflatable rubber tanks or broadcasting fake radio traffic to fool spy planes. They are using search engine optimization, global newswire syndication, the viral nature of social media, and the desperate, wishful thinking of Western diplomats to achieve strategic surprise. Let us look closer at the specific choice of Pakistan as the stage for this grand theater. In narrative warfare, the venue is just as important as the message. Why Islamabad? If the goal was simply to talk about peace, Iran could have flown their foreign minister to Oman or Qatar, the traditional, well-established mediators of the Middle East. But Qatar and Oman are already heavily scrutinized. Everyone expects diplomatic maneuvering there. Everyone knows what happens in Doha and Muscat. Going to Pakistan serves a brilliant dual purpose in this narrative war. First, Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state. It possesses a massive, highly capable, heavily armed military apparatus. By standing shoulder to shoulder with the Pakistani Chief of Army Staff, Iran is projecting an aura of immense regional weight and unassailable power. They are silently, but unmistakably, signaling to Washington and Tel Aviv, we are not alone. We are not a rogue state hiding in the shadows. We have access to corridors of power, to nuclear-armed neighbors that you do not fully control. It creates a powerful optical illusion of a grand Eastern alliance, a united front, even if the actual reality of the Iran-Pakistan relationship is historically fraught with deep sectarian tension, border skirmishes, and mutual suspicion. Second, Pakistan acts as a massive, willing amplifier for the narrative. Islamabad has its own complex, often strained relationship with the United States and the broader Western world. By playing the gracious host to the Iranians during a time of global crisis, Pakistan gets to elevate its own diplomatic status. They position themselves as a vital, indispensable player in global security. Pakistan willingly participates in the dissemination of this narrative because it serves their own strategic interests to look like a rational peacemaker on the world stage. Iran recognized this mutual benefit, this convergence of narrative interests, and exploited it perfectly. Tehran essentially rented Pakistan's diplomatic credibility for the weekend to launder their own strategic messaging and present it to the West as clean, objective reality. But the real victims of this cognitive assault are not the politicians or the politicians' generals. The real victims are the intelligence analysts, the journalists, and the general public in the West who consume this weaponized information at face value. When an average citizen scrolling through their newsfeed on a Friday evening reads that ceasefire talks are happening, a specific psychological reaction occurs. They breathe a sigh of relief. The psychological tension drops. The expectation of immediate conflict decreases. The public consciousness begins to pivot away from war and toward the comforting idea of resolution. This creates a massive, exploitable vulnerability. When the public firmly believes peace is imminent, any subsequent military action, even if it is entirely justified and defensive in nature, feels twice as shocking, twice as escalatory, and twice as unjustified. Iran is intentionally, maliciously widening the gap between public expectation and military reality. They are setting the West up for a massive psychological shock. Imagine, for a moment, the incredibly complex strategic calculations happening inside the Pentagon, the CIA, and the White House right now. American intelligence agencies are not blind. They know that the Islamabad trip is a smokescreen. They have the satellite imagery, they have the signals, intelligence. They know Iraqchi is not negotiating a ceasefire, and they know the IRGC is moving missiles. But the American political leadership still has to deal with the heavy, suffocating fallout of the narrative that Iran has unleashed. If the White House greenlights an Israeli strike, or if the United States conducts a preemptive strike of its own based on classified intelligence of an imminent Iranian attack, they will have to spend weeks, perhaps months, fighting an uphill battle in the global press, explaining why they actively ignored Iran's so-called diplomatic overtures. They will be forced to justify to their own citizens why they chose war when peace was supposedly making headlines. Iran has successfully weaponized the concept of the benefit of the doubt. It is a psychological masterstroke. They are openly daring the West to call their bluff, knowing that they have engineered a scenario where they win no matter the outcome. If the West attacks, Iran wins the ultimate moral high ground, claiming victimhood and rallying global condemnation against the aggressors. If the West hesitates, paralyzed by the fear of looking like warmongers, Iran wins the most valuable resource of all, the time they need to fortify their defenses, disperse their assets, and prepare for a long war on their own terms. It is a win-win scenario constructed entirely out of thin air, tailored suits, and empty diplomatic rhetoric. Now, let us pivot to what happens next. In the realm of cognitive warfare, you must always look over the horizon. How does this narrative war escalate from here? We must wargame the future scenarios, because a cognitive operation of this magnitude, one that has so successfully hacked the global attention span, is never just a one-off event. It is a foundation. It is a stepping stone to a much larger strategic objective. The first highly probable scenario is what we call the echo chamber effect. Having successfully planted the ceasefire narrative in the fertile ground of Pakistan, Iran will not stop there. They will immediately begin a diplomatic world tour targeting non-aligned or sympathetic nations. We will see similar photo ops, similar red carpets, and similar press releases in places like Moscow, Beijing, Pretoria, or perhaps even a tour of friendly South American nations. In each capital, the message delivered will be exactly the same, repeated with rhythmic discipline. We want peace. We are ready to negotiate without preconditions. The warmongers in Tel Aviv and the imperialists in Washington are the only things standing in the way of global stability and economic prosperity. With every stop on this tour, the narrative snowballs. It builds undeniable momentum. It stops being a claim and starts becoming an established, widely accepted fact in the minds of the global South. By the time this diplomatic theater concludes, the United Nations General Assembly will be primed, conditioned, and ready to overwhelmingly condemn any preemptive military action against Iran. Tehran will have built an impenetrable diplomatic fortress, a shield made of international consensus, constructed out of nothing but carefully curated talking points and manipulated optics. The second scenario we must anticipate is significantly darker. It is the martyrdom frame. In this scenario, Iranian intelligence knows that a massive military confrontation is absolutely inevitable. They have already run the numbers, assessed the enemy's posture, and decided that war is coming regardless of what anyone says. In this context, the diplomatic tour is not designed to stop the war. It is designed to dictate exactly how history will record the beginning of the war. By loudly, aggressively, and repeatedly proclaiming their desire for a ceasefire to anyone who will listen. Iran is setting the stage to claim absolute self-defense when the missiles finally begin to fly. If Israel strikes, Iran will immediately turn to the global cameras, point to their trips to Islamabad, their statements in Moscow, their pleas at the UN, and say to their own citizens and the world at large, look at what we did. We tried everything humanly possible. We went to our neighbors, we offered the olive branch, we pleaded for sanity, and they answered our pleas with fire and destruction. Now, our hands are tied. We have no choice but to unleash hell to defend our sovereign nation. This specific narrative framing is absolutely crucial for Iran's internal cohesion. The Iranian regime faces significant, ongoing domestic unrest. The economy is crumbling under sanctions, the currency is collapsing, and a large portion of the population is deeply dissatisfied with theocratic rule, convincing a weary, skeptical, and potentially rebellious population to endure the horrific deprivations of a devastating, prolonged regional war requires a fiercely compelling story. The people must believe, down to their very core, that the war was maliciously forced upon them by an aggressive, uncompromising enemy, not chosen by the reckless proxy strategies of their own leaders. The ceasefire illusion provides the perfect, unassailable alibi. It unites a fractured domestic front under the powerful, unifying banner of righteous, defensive victimhood. And then there is the third scenario. This is the scenario that keeps military planners awake at night. The strategic ambush. In this scenario, the ceasefire narrative deployed by Iran is so incredibly successful, so perfectly executed, that it actually changes the physical, kinetic military posture of the adversary. Israel and the United States, bogged down by the intense diplomatic noise, facing immense pressure from European allies to de-escalate, and hoping desperately to avoid being dragged into a wider, uncontrollable regional war, decide to delay their planned operations. They stand down their high alert status. They pull their strike aircraft back from the forward edge of the battle area. They tell their commanders to give diplomacy a chance to work. They buy into the illusion, and the very moment the West relaxes its grip, the very moment the airspace goes quiet and the radars are dialed back, Iran strikes. They use the narrow, fleeting window of hesitation that they painstakingly manufactured to launch a massive, coordinated, devastating multi-front offensive. The hand that was extended in peace, holding the olive branch, suddenly drops, and the other hand pulls the trigger on 1,000 ballistic missiles. This is the ultimate terrifying triumph of narrative warfare. It is the moment when your lies are so meticulously crafted, so deeply convincing, that the enemy lowers their own shield voluntarily, inviting their own destruction. You see, the architects of Iranian military and political strategy are master students of asymmetric warfare. They are pragmatists. They know mathematically that they cannot win a conventional force-on-force war of attrition against the combined technological might, the air superiority, and the economic depth of Israel and the United States. They cannot outspend the Pentagon. They cannot outfly the Israeli Air Force. In a purely kinetic fight, they lose. But they do not intend to fight a purely kinetic fight. They intend to outthink their enemies. They intend to outmessage them. They intend to exploit the fatal structural flaw of all Western democracies, the desperate built-in need for a clean, rational, diplomatic resolution to every crisis. The West views peace as the natural state of the world and war as an aberration. Iran flips this entirely. The West looks at diplomacy as a mechanism to end wars. Iran looks at diplomacy as just another weapon system used to fight them. To Tehran, a press conference is no different than a drone strike. Both are designed to degrade the enemy's capacity to resist. When Foreign Minister Araghchi stood on that sunlit tarmac in Islamabad, shaking, hands and smiling for the flashing cameras, he was not acting as a diplomat, seeking a peaceful resolution. He was acting as a frontline field commander in the cognitive battle space. Every single smile was a calculated, offensive maneuver. Every handshake was a tactical deployment of psychological pressure. The word ceasefire was a precision-guided, deeply penetrating munition aimed directly at the minds, the fears, and the political vulnerabilities of Western policymakers. And the terrifying, undeniable truth is that it worked. It worked flawlessly. It worked because we, the audience, inherently want to believe it. Human nature instinctively recoils from the horror, the chaos, and the economic devastation of war. When someone, anyone, steps up to a microphone and offers a glimmer of hope, a whisper of a ceasefire, a promise of de-escalation, our collective psychological instinct is to grasp it like a lifeline. Iran intimately understands this deep-seated vulnerability in the Western psyche. They are strip mining our own psychology, turning our desperate desire for peace into a devastating tool for their own military and strategic advantage. We must radically change how we consume information in the modern era. We must stop analyzing these highly orchestrated events through the naive, outdated lens of traditional 20th century statecraft. We must absolutely stop taking official press releases and diplomatic statements at face value. When a nation that has spent decades actively funding, training, and fueling proxy wars across 3 different time zones suddenly miraculously claims to be the vanguard of regional peace, you do not write a headline celebrating a ceasefire. You ask, with relentless suspicion, what they are hiding behind the curtain. You ask why the chief of the Pakistani army, a man of immense kinetic power, was the one greeting the diplomat on the runway, rather than a civilian counterpart. You ask what kind of dark, unwritten military guarantees were quietly exchanged in the secure, bug-swept back rooms of Islamabad while the press pool was busy typing up the fake peace proposal. You ask, using satellite intelligence and human assets, exactly how many ballistic missiles were moved out of their hardened silos during the exact hour that the world was mesmerized by the theater of a red carpet. The cognitive war is not some distant threat coming in the future. It is not some theoretical concept taught in the abstract classrooms of military war colleges. It is happening right now. It is unfolding on your screens, in your social media news feeds, in the headlines of your morning paper, and in the heavily guarded halls of power across the globe. You are living inside the battle space. Iran has boldly shown their hand. They are playing for keeps. They have demonstrated, with chilling effectiveness, an elite capability to manipulate global perception, to freeze the decision-making apparatus of their enemies with a single, carefully chosen word, and to dominate the narrative battle space with absolute, uncompromising authority. They are not cornered. They are not desperate. They are cold, calculating, patient, and currently holding the psychological high ground. The illusion of peace has been cast over the region. The diplomatic smokescreen is thick, choking the airwaves and blinding the analysts. And while the world stares blankly at the shadow play unfolding in Islamabad, mesmerized by the false engineered promise of a ceasefire, the real war, the kinetic war, is quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly moving into position. The board is being set. The clock is relentlessly ticking down. And Tehran, at this very moment, controls the hands of time. Keep your eyes open. Question every single narrative you are fed. Reject the comforting lies of diplomatic theater. Because in the invisible, all-encompassing war for your mind, the single most fatal mistake you can make is believing exactly what they want you to see.